Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily rule. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Thanks to Mr. Holman Picato for this one. Amy escapes at Kroxa while she controls Quintorius. How many tokens does Amy get? Okay, so there's two different ideas that we're going to need in order to figure out the answer to this question. First of all, we're going to need to consider carefully what would count as a trigger for Quintorius' ability, and second, we're going to need to look at the process for casting a spell with escape in order to figure out how many times something in that process is going to count for Quintorius' ability. So first of all, we're going to talk about Quintorius' trigger condition. You can see it says whenever one or more cards leaves your graveyard. So what that would mean is that anytime a card is in your graveyard and it goes to not being in your graveyard, that would count as a trigger. And it says one or more cards leaves your graveyard, which means that if multiple cards leave your graveyard as part of the same game event, then that would only still constitute a single instance of that trigger. So now let's take a look at what the process for casting a spell with escape would be. And so, of course, the first step in casting a spell, any spell, is to move it from whatever zone it's in onto the stack. And so in this case, we would be taking the Kroxa from the graveyard and putting it onto the stack. And immediately after we do that, the fairies who are in charge of triggered abilities are going to notice that there is a card that was in your graveyard and it's not anymore. And so that would constitute a instance of Quintorius' trigger condition happening. So the fairies are going to write that one on the whiteboard. Of course, they aren't going to put it on the stack yet because triggered abilities don't get put onto the stack until a player would be about to get priority. So it's just going to get written on the whiteboard for now. We'll put it on the stack later. So sometime after that occurs, as part of a completely separate event in the process of casting a spell. So since it's a separate step, we know it's going to be a distinct game action. We're going to have to pay the costs, right? So when we pay the costs, of course, one of those costs is going to be that we have to exile some cards from our graveyard because we're escaping. And so we exile those 5 cards. And at this point, the fairies are going to see again, hey, immediately after this event, we're going to see that there's cards that was in our graveyard, but they're not anymore. And so how many instances of Quintorius' trigger is this going to be? Is it going to be 1 or is it going to be 5? And so there's no reason to believe that the 5 cards get exiled one at a time. There's nothing in the rules that says they would get exiled separately. And indeed, because we're paying this as part of one cost, we're exiling all of them together. So because all 5 of these cards left the graveyard as part of the same game event, then we're only going to be getting 1 trigger from Quintorius out of this one. So the fairies are going to write a second time Quintorius' ability triggered on the whiteboard, and then immediately after the spell costs are paid, then the spell is going to be considered to be cast, which means that the next step is going to be a player is about to get priority. So we're going to take all those triggered abilities the fairies wrote on the whiteboard, and we're going to put them on the stack. And both of these triggered abilities are controlled by Amy, so Amy would get to choose what order they get put onto the stack. Of course, in this case, it doesn't really make sense that one ordering of each instance of this ability is going to be different from a different ordering of those abilities. But you could see that if there were a different thing that happened with this triggered ability, there could be a case where it might be important to put them on the stack in a certain order rather than just randomly. And so Amy does get to be the person who makes that choice. And so that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again tomorrow for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.